Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight in Zimbabwe, President Mnangagwa's State of the Nation address doesn't go down too well with opposition MPs, many of whom walk out in protest. The leader asks for patience, meanwhile, in tackling the country's ever-deepening economic troubles. Also, young girls and women freed from a baby factory in Lagos are being treated for their trauma and injuries. The group were held by traffickers who sold their babies. And Sudan kicks off a new era in football with its first ever women's only league. It's just one of the developments in the wake of the country's revolution this year. That's with the ousting of Omar al-Bashir back in April. But first, opposition MPs in Zimbabwe walked out of Parliament and President Emerson Mnangagwa's State of the Nation address on Tuesday. Lawmakers from the Movement for Democratic Change still don't recognise Mnangagwa's leadership. He, meanwhile, pled for more time in tackling the country's ever-deepening economic troubles. With no electricity, no cash and no fuel, he acknowledged that many Zimbabweans are struggling to get by. Troubles that are being made worse by senior doctors' threats to go on indefinite strike this week. Ryan Truscott in Harare, he tells us more about what Mnangagwa means when he asks for more time.
I think it's interesting that he said that he was aware of the pain being experienced by Zimbabweans, especially those on low incomes who are struggling with inflation, struggling with fuel queues, electricity cuts, and of course the effects of drought. Mnangagwa said that the government's economic reforms were working. I think few will believe him, though. The local currency is worth just about 1/15 of what it was worth a couple of years ago. When you go into supermarkets, you can see that many people just aren't able to buy much anymore. They might just have 2 or 3 things in a shopping basket or in their hands. And the political reforms that the West and perhaps some investors want to see aren't happening fast enough. Today, as you mentioned, MPs from the opposition MDC walked out of Parliament just as President Mnangagwa began his State of the Nation speech. The MDC insists that Mnangagwa was not a legitimate president, and the parties threaten more street protests. So the economic crisis and the political crisis won't engender the sort of confidence that's needed for investment. And now, to make things worse, senior doctors say they'll go on strike on Thursday. For the past month, those senior doctors have kept hospitals going during a strike by junior doctors, and now these senior doctors say that they simply can't afford to carry on.
Ryan Truscott there for us in Harare. Now, Tanzania will repatriate a first group of Burundian refugees on Thursday. About 1,000 are due to be sent back over the border as part of what Bujumbura says is a voluntary process. The neighbours agreed that 200,000 Burundians who'd fled violent political instability in their country would be sent back at the start of this month. Hundreds of people have been killed since 2015, when President Pierre Nkurunziza ran for a third disputed term. Rights groups warn that refugees may be being forced to return to Burundi before it's safe, and that there is a risk of more violence in the country ahead of elections next year. Now, Cameroon's 5-day national dialogue aimed at ending an escalating crisis centred around an Anglophone secessionist insurgency has got off to a bumpy start. Many opposition and separatist leaders boycotted the government-organised talks from the beginning. Tuesday was day 2, and the criticism just grew louder. Former presidential candidate Akere Munoz walked out, denouncing the affair as a masquerade. Others who quickly turned their back on the dialogue say that it's just for show.
What happened troubled me a bit. The speakers were chosen beforehand, so there was no debate to be had, no questions to be had. The commissions have been already set up, the president and vice president of the commission, everything was set up. So we had no discussions on the form of the dialogue, what had to be discussed, how we will proceed, what will happen to resolutions. Nothing at all happened. So from that point of view, I was just a spectator, and I didn't see how my presence could contribute to anything. So I decided to exit.
Well, 19 pregnant girls and young women who police in Nigeria say were rescued from traffickers are now being rehabilitated for the trauma that they suffered. The group were found imprisoned in what's been dubbed a baby factory. Most of the victims were just teenagers, many of whom came from all around the country. Investigators believe that their captors were selling their children. Sam Olokoya tells us more about the conditions the women were found in.
Well, the fact that these women were kept in captivity meant that they're in very, very bad condition. I mean, some had injuries. They were still in very, very dirty, filthy environment. More or less, they were being kept just to do the primary goal of delivering the babies. There was nothing in place to actually take care of the welfare of these babies, the babies they will give birth to. So they look very hungry, tired, traumatized. Some were even crying that there was a particular one that said she actually came in with a baby, and the moment she came with the baby, they took the baby away from her, and she doesn't know where that baby is. So it's a case of people who have been held against their will and then have been made to produce babies that will not be theirs but will ultimately be sold in the market.
And who's buying these babies?
Well, if there are no buyers, nobody will go into this business. I think it's quite a large, a thriving business, given the fact that we continue to see cases like this occurring. Mainly, they have to do with people who have problems giving birth to children. The question you will ask is that why not just go and adopt a baby? Here, culturally, it's not really acceptable to adopt babies. So people would rather pretend that to buy babies and pretend these babies are theirs. And what we've seen in the past is cases where women will pretend to be pregnant, and then ultimately, after 9 months, they will buy these babies. And the other question is, why will people not go and do IVF or things like that to be able to produce? It is cheaper for the buyers to get these babies from these baby factories than to go and to get babies medically. Here, they are selling the babies for just about $1,000+ plus. To go for IVF, you will need maybe about $6,000-7,000. So that's why this practice is thriving very well in Nigeria.
Well, Sudan's Prime Minister met with his French counterpart here in Paris this week. Abdallah Hamdok also met with a senior rebel leader who's exiled in France. The two men reportedly spoke for several hours. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
This was Abdallah Hamdok's first visit to Europe as Sudan's Prime Minister. He has only been in the job for a month. Emmanuel Macron promised to host an international donors conference for Sudan. The main topic of Hamdok's discussion with the French president was Sudan's presence on the US list of state sponsors of terrorism.
We
will, of course, continue to plead with the United States for Sudan to be removed from the list of states that support terrorism, which will allow it to normalize its relationships with international financial institutions. It is an important battle, and we will fully support you.
Being on the list means Sudan is ineligible for international debt relief, and it limits potential foreign investment, as Hamdok told France 24.
The removal or delisting of Sudan from the SSTL is a key to anything that we would like to do in the transitional period, whether it is a peace agenda, but more importantly, in the economic agenda. Opening up the country, investment is linked to it, the debt issues are linked to it.
While in France, Hamdok met a senior Darfur rebel, Abdul Wahid Noor. He has been fighting Khartoum since 2003. The conflict there left more than 300,000 people dead, according to the UN. Hamdok said the two men had discussed the possibility of peace talks. The new Prime Minister, who came to power 4 months after the fall of former strongman Omar al-Bashir, will also have to find solutions to the armed conflicts in the provinces of Blue Nile and South Kordofan.
Well, Sudan's kicked off a new era in football with its first ever female-only club. Two teams clashed at the start of their own women's championship in Khartoum this week. The tournament would have seemed unlikely just as recently as the start of the year. But since the ousting of former leader Omar al-Bashir back in April and the creation of a joint civilian-military ruling body, women's rights has become much more of a priority, including those on the pitch. Emerald Maxwell has more.
In scenes that were not long ago unimaginable in Khartoum, these players kicked off Sudan's first ever women's club football league.
This is a great historic day for Sudan. It's the result of a very big effort that didn't start yesterday.
The crowd cheered and chanted civilian rule as the teams of Tahadi and Difa inaugurated the 21 club championship. For these women growing up under strict Sharia law, playing football in their homeland was virtually impossible. But all that changed when longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir was toppled in April, following nationwide protests.
This was my first time playing at the stadium in Khartoum. It was really great and special.
If it hadn't been for the Sudanese revolution, my goal was to perhaps play for a country other than Sudan. But now I don't have to. It's better to play for your own country.
The start of the Female Football League comes amid expectations that the current 3-year transition period will lead to the promotion of women's rights, sports and arts. Following this first club clash in the capital, matches are scheduled in other parts of the country in the coming days.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.